Okay. Uh, Good evening, Mary Kate. I want to introduce you to a very good friend of mine, a dear lady, my sweetheart here at Fox Manor. This is Dr. Helen Suchara.
Good.
Okay,
Thank you.
I got that right?
Thank you.
And she joined the Peace Corps, not as a young lady out of college, but as a retiree. So she's got quite a story to tell, and I think we'll just let her go ahead and tell her story.
Very good. Well, my story begins with why I joined the Peace Corps at age 71. Because prior to that, I'd had a series of experiences which I decided were pretty much qualifying me for that particular assignment. And what I was doing was I was calling some of my former students by telephone to intrigue them, to interest them in this new project that was opening up in Poland between the incoming new Democratic President Wałęsa and George Bush II in the USA. Between them, they had this plan that if they could bring it off immediately, this was in late '89, that if they could bring it off, that by the end of '89, '90, they would have the Peace Corps in Poland, primarily for the teaching of English. And they were looking for some 30 people, and they ended up with 60. So 30 went to Poland and 30 went to, I believe at that time, it had to be, what's that one next to Russia?
Ukraine?
To Ukraine, right. Well, to back it up to my desire to go into the Peace Corps was the fact that I had made all these calls, and I began to feel a bit embarrassed and a bit guilty that I was not successful in finding anybody. Actually, it was too fast. It was too fast a project. But in the meantime, I did make out the application and was accepted, and felt that I was qualified, not as qualified from the standpoint of let's say, a university student finishing college and entering the Peace Corps at that time. I knew that appearance-wise and physically, in physical strength, that I would have competition from the young people. But I felt that I had experience behind me and that would be helpful. And what I was counting on was the fact that in my preparation for college, I realized that I was from an ethnic community that didn't have too many friends outside of our small Polish American community. And when I went to high school, I entered a public high school, and there I began to meet new people and began to know about other people. And of course, I began to meet more Russian people, more Ukrainian, more Polish people, more German people. So many of my friends were in that group in high school. As a result, when I entered Wayne State as an undergraduate, this is now coming to the first year of college, we soon learned that those university professors knew about our limited backgrounds in our immigrant groups, that we needed new kinds of experiences. And so they put in some requirements, like the first 2 years of college, you were supposed to earn something like 90 hours of working in a community group of another nationality And on my way, I traveled by streetcar from the southwest corner of Detroit to the Michigan Avenue, Woodward Avenue, Warren Avenue area where Wayne State University was located and is to this point. And as a result, I kept seeing this Spanish-speaking group of children who had a big sign put across their play yard, Hispanic, 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 more Hispanic. And so I thought I would volunteer over there to work with those children because as in all colleges, you always have at least one day that is shorter than your other 4 days. And so one afternoon a week for all the weeks of the year, I volunteered to work with these Hispanic children on the playground. It was fenced in because they were young children. They were children from ages of 3 to 12. And so that was my first experience outside of my own community and the university. And then when I came into the junior year and made a decision that I was going to become a teacher, then there was another requirement, and that was that you looked at your economic kind of strata. And if you had not had experience with well-to-do people, in other words, I didn't work in a dime store or in a grocery store where I would have had contact with people who came from better-to-do backgrounds. The only well-to-do people I knew were the Fords and a couple of other families whom we watched entering the Hudson's store, the Hudson's downtown store occasionally. So as a result, one of our counselors at Wayne suggested that we volunteer a number of hours to give up Sundays to visit what was called the Old Ladies' Home, and it's in the Wayne campus, and it's right across the street from one of the theaters, which originally was a church, and it's now a Wayne State Theater. And so we visited on Sundays, not actually just visited, we were invited to tea parties with them. And so, like the women at that time, the women dressed up, that is the ones we visited. And when they had a tea party, they wore white gloves. So we, the students, did the same thing. We bought some white gloves and we went to sit and have tea with these women. So in that kind of series of experiences preparing us to be able to teach in all kinds of communities, that was a kind of a beginning for me. And as a result, I became more and more interested in places like the very near the main library downtown was the International Institute. And so first we began attending their festivals where you would see all kinds of ethnic dancing, ethnic food being sold, ethnic choirs singing, and little by little I became so interested in the International Institute that eventually, later on, when I was a teacher, a professor at Wayne State, I volunteered my time at least a couple of times a month to help out with special projects at the International Institute. So that was my own background in the beginning. So you can see that as a result, leading from one level of experience to another, I developed quite an interest in people from other parts of the world. And my first teaching job was teaching children who had tuberculosis in the Michigan State Sanatorium in Howell, Michigan. So that was an experience different in another sphere. In other words, every Monday when we reported in to the office to check in for the week's work, we would be told by a committee of medical people, the medical doctor taking care of the children, the nurses, the occupational therapist, the physical therapist, as to what the status was of the children that we were going to teach that following week. And some children were put on caution. We would be told in advance not to push them too hard, not to encourage too much physical activity, whatever the problem was. But the children, most of the children, had not the lung tuberculosis, but they had the bone and skin tuberculosis. So there had to be care in how they would be expected to perform in the classroom. All those children were able to either walk or be brought in not in walkers, but on little stretchers, especially the children who had bone tuberculosis. So that was another kind of world in which I was growing as a teacher. Even though I had my certificate and I was qualified to teach, it was still a brand new experience, brand new. And then I returned to Detroit during the war years because the boys were being drafted and they needed more and more teachers to come back from what they call the rural areas. You were brought up in what we referred to as the parts beyond the big city.
Suburban?
The suburbs.
The suburbs.
Right.
But in my day, they were called agricultural area, rural areas. So
This would have been, Helen, you mentioned the war, that would have been World War II. About 1942, 43.
Right. So that I was in Howell from 41 to 43. And in 43, I came into Detroit to teach, right. And then in Detroit, that was another kind of adjustment. And again, Detroit was then began to see children who were the children of people who came from the South. They came from other parts of the USA to take jobs in the war plants. And so they moved in with their whole families. So that in Detroit, we began to see many of those children in those schools at that time. So that was another kind of adjustment. And little by little, my whole world was developing very differently from where I had started. So I taught in Detroit for about 7 years, and during that time, I had the good fortune of having been visited by some professors from Columbia University Teachers College, and a couple of them tapped me with an invitation to come and earn the doctorate in education at Teachers College, Columbia. So that became part of my background in preparing for university teaching. And in order to do that, I did take a 3-year position. After doing 3 years at Teachers College, Columbia, I took 3 more years at a small girls' college in Boston. It was so small that it did not have 500 students ever during my time over there. So there would be between 425, 475 students. Most of them were in residence. In other words, they came in from other states, the majority of them came in from New York State. And then the next group would be people in the Massachusetts area. So that was a private college with young people coming in from fairly well-to-do homes at that time. After 3 years of that, and having finished the degree, Wayne State hired me as a beginning professor. So I was an assistant professor on that level. Then I moved on to being associate professor, and eventually, I'm skipping a lot of years, and eventually from the late 40s to the 65, in 65 I became a full professor at Wayne State, in the College of Education at Wayne State. And at the same time, because of its location, I continued to volunteer at the International Institute, and by that time, because of the war years, the International Institute needed a lot of help from people of all kinds of backgrounds who could speak all kinds of languages to assist with those immigrants who were coming from other places, usually at that time from Europe. And so with that volunteering and my teaching at Wayne, finally at the age of 71, when I retired, I decided that I could help recruit some of the people they were looking for the project between George Bush and the incoming president of Poland, the Republic of Poland, they referred to it in those words. And so when I was not successful in finding anybody, then I volunteered, and that's how I went into the Peace Corps.
Well, that's quite a story. That's quite a story.
A long way.
Yes.
From the beginning. But the beginning was important because it was the building of my background with these different ethnic groups with which I became more familiar and more knowledgeable, more understanding of what they were about and what they were going through.
And when you were active in the Peace Corps, you were in Poland, was that correct?
In Poland for 2 years, right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And you speak Polish, I would assume.
My Polish was not very good. It was what we would consider a street language and a home language. And many of the European countries have what they call these segments where you may know German, but if you live in a certain part of Germany most of your life, you have a way of speaking that is different from, let's say, in Berlin, the heart of the city life. So my Polish, if I were to speak with someone in Warsaw, and I'm from a village, then one has to be very careful in listening to the Warsaw person speaking and follow his lead. And what you do normally is you let him ask the questions, and then you pick up on the question and you give him the answer, so that your structure and your pronunciation is correct, or you think it's correct.
Well, that's great.
Right.
So all in all, how many years did you spend in the Peace Corps? 2 years?
2 years.
And how has that experience affected the rest of your life?
Well, in reverse, I'd like to take it in reverse first, that all that I had said before going into the Peace Corps, was a development of me in terms of what I had to offer to a Peace Corps assignment. And I felt qualified in the sense that I could be sensitive to where I would be placed, and I could be sensitive to the needs of the people, and I had learned how to do it in terms of understanding them. And that example that I gave, let them ask the question and then I take the lead from the question.
Oh, that's great.
Provide the answer for them.
Well, Helen, it's an amazing story, an amazing life. we're certainly happy you agreed to give us your outlook.
I was very happy. I really was, in that I did that because even though I was 72 when I came back from the Peace Corps, because I was 71 when I entered, and actually I was 73 when I returned to Detroit. That I had no idea I was going to live this long to begin with. You know, even at age 70, I was thinking if I make it to 75, that'll be a good life. But since I was making it to 95 and plus, then I began to know that I had to stay active. So I have continued to function for Wayne State University in my own right, in that I belong to what is called a board of visitors, and that's made up of undergraduate students, grad students, and professors who are on the job. It's a group of about 20 people who represent these different groups, and I represent the aged who can still teleconference. Now there are four meetings a year, and it's on helping Wayne keep growing, on helping Wayne State University keep growing as a fine university that we know it to be now. And as a result, we look for funds, we stay in touch with students. So one of the things, besides attending these Board of Visitors meetings, in order to attend 4 of them, I do the teleconference 3 times, and one time I try to get somebody to take me down there and bring me back so that I appear personally at the conference. But in the meantime, we receive different kinds of little assignments. For instance, every member of that Board of Visitors makes at least some financial contribution every year. It's not limited to how much you can give, because we can't all give the same amount, but we each make some contribution. The other is that we write to students who have been accepted for admission to the university as freshmen, but they haven't made up their minds because they've had 3 or 4 offers. And so then I volunteer to write 10 for each session, for each semester. I write 10 cards to 10 separate students on why I think he should come to Wayne State University.
Well, that's wonderful.
That is an extra kind of assignment, but it is. So we do those kinds of little activities to encourage students who qualify, but who have some good offers, and they have to make up their minds. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Helen, for this interview, and you are the brightest, cheeriest 97-year-old I've ever met. A wonderful lady.
But
Thank
do you think we have answered some of the questions that your granddaughter might have had?
I think so, and more. You know,
what you might do is to scratch out the big error that appears in Kathy's first page, something about the word were
should be in
successfully uploaded.
I noticed that.
Yeah, because what happened is that while Grandpa was preparing me to talk with you, or to talk
right,
pretty much, Kathy was helping me.
Kathy is her niece.
My niece, and she was helping me fulfill a requirement for which I don't have the equipment, and that is that those of us who have returned as Peace Corps volunteers have been invited to the tune of $219. In other words, we each pay to enter our information into this book that will be published supposedly by May of this year.
Oh,
It's scheduled for 2016 in May. And we were to answer a certain number of questions, like, just to give you an idea, this was from the direction of the Peace Corps office in Washington. We invite you to reflect on your personal Peace Corps connections and offer you the opportunity to share your stories for publication. And the first one is, and they tell us how to limit it in the number of words. What is your favorite memory from your time in the Peace Corps? My favorite one was the fact that all my life I had been learning and picking up and being taught by other good people that I had, somebody did a pretty good job on me, that I felt qualified to do that. And then another one is, what does the Peace Corps community mean to you? Well, right now, I still belong. It's a group in the state of Michigan, and the biggest group is organized around Ann Arbor, that part. But in the southwestern part of Michigan, around the Detroit area, there is a very large organization, and they get together. They have a board, they have a president and officers, and they get together and they run a newsletter. It's called Semiconductor. And as a result, I receive the newsletter, and every time that they have, let's say, a yard sale, I spread the word in my community, which is here. And we get some boxes ready for them, and they come and pick them up, and they have a yard sale. And what they do is they make money to send to the young people who are out in the Peace Corps, and they're running little private projects. See, you have 2 assignments. Peace Corps gives you 2 assignments, and you have to perform those. They have priority. But if you want to do something special for the community in which you live in the Peace Corps, and if you can get some friends to help you financially, and that's how this organization helps. So they'll write or they'll call and they'll say, if I had $100, here's what I would do for the kids in my community, or the kids that I'm teaching in high school. And we raise